Nintendo just dropped some huge announcements in the latest Nintendo Direct, and among them is our first look at a new Yoshi game for the Wii U. Now they didn't show much, but we're not going to let that stop us from starting up the old analysis machine and seeing what secrets the footage and screenshots might be hiding. Okay, so you probably don't need me to point out that the game looks a lot like Kirby's Epic Yarn, which came out on the Wii back in 2010. As you can see, they share a similar art style with the characters being stitched together from yarn, which makes sense considering this game is being made by the same development team. But this time it's being supervised by Takeshi Tezuka, who's been involved with most of the Yoshi platformers to date, including the original Yoshi's Island on the Super Nintendo and Yoshi's Story for the Nintendo 64. And what's interesting is that we can actually see what might be inspiration taken from both of those titles here. Take the art style for example. While the primary influence is obviously Kirby's Epic Yarn, as mentioned, its roots are actually based in Yoshi's Story, which also featured a material look, including backgrounds that appear to be stitched together. Now admittedly, these similarities could just be a coincidence and may not actually be indicative of how the game will play at all. But what's not a coincidence is that the setting itself appears to be ripped right from Yoshi's Island. If we take a look at the flowers in the foreground, we can see they look almost identical between the two games. And if you look in the background, you can see similar Super Mario World style mountains. And finally, even the arrow signs bear a strong resemblance. So with a setting to match Yoshi's Island, but visuals a hue closer to Yoshi's Story, what side does the gameplay land on? Well, as you probably noticed, Yoshi appears to be going solo on this one with no baby Mario in sight, as in Yoshi's Story. And since there doesn't exactly appear to be a ton of things happening in the footage or screenshots, we think we might be in store for a slower paced adventure, like Yoshi's Story. Which again makes sense provided that Kirby's Epic Yarn itself had a rather middling pace. In fact, it might actually be more accurate to look at it as not really being a Yoshi game at all, but instead as a spiritual successor to Kirby's Epic Yarn, except starring Yoshi, as Kirby's Epic Yarn itself is more of its own thing than it was a true Kirby successor. For example, in that game, Kirby lost his trademark ability to inhale enemies, similar to how Yoshi now no longer seems to be capable of turning enemies into eggs. Instead, consuming enemies appears to do something quite different now. As you can see, it appears that Yoshi starts off as a mere outline made of a thin string of yarn, again like Kirby. However, by downing an enemy, he'll enter his egg cocoon and emerge as a fully filled-in figure. One of our viewers, Hedgeru, thinks this might be similar to grabbing a mushroom in Mario, perhaps granting Yoshi an extra hit. Or, he also suggests that maybe this is the only way for Yoshi to attack enemies directly, as we could then see him stomp a Shy Guy. If we look at Kirby's Epic Yarn for reference again, we can see that Kirby, who's in outline form for the entire game, simply lands softly on top of the enemies if you try to stomp one. Of course, it's impossible to tell for sure based on the short video, but it's pretty clear changing forms will factor into the gameplay in some way. In fact, if you watch closely, you can see that the Shy Guys, who seem to pay Yoshi no attention when in outline form, have a sudden change of heart and run for their lives the moment that Yoshi becomes full-figured. And beyond becoming full-figured, it seems Yoshi can change in other ways as well, as is shown in one of the screenshots that features him in supersized form. This might mark the return of the transformations from Yoshi's Island, which saw Yoshi take the form of a helicopter among other vehicles. It would make a lot of sense considering Kirby's Epic Yarn featured a ton of transformations all its own. And as you might have guessed, the similarities between the two games don't end there. Check out these jewels, which also seem very similar to those in Kirby's Epic Yarn. This, at the least, suggests that Kirby's point system returns and that you'll be able to replay levels to better your score. But beyond that, it might also reflect how the entire game plays. Because as you might remember in Kirby's Epic Yarn, you couldn't die at all. Instead, you merely dropped some of the gems that you collected every time you took a hit, which impacted your score for the whole level. So maybe it works the same way this time. It actually would be true to Yoshi's Island, where Yoshi couldn't really die either. Now, it looks like in order to get to some of those jewels, such as the ones hidden underground here, you'll have to actually use the doorways to travel behind the fabric background, again like in Kirby's Epic Yarn. Okay, we're nearly done here, but as usual, there's still just a few final details to point out. Now, obviously the game has a lot in common with Kirby's Epic Yarn. I mean, I'm really getting tired of saying those words. But did you notice the environment is actually 3D this time around, as opposed to the completely flat levels in Kirby? It doesn't appear to change how the game plays any, but if we take a look at the remainder of the screenshots, we can see that it does hint at a more dynamic camera, allowing us to view the action from different angles. And you can really get a sense for the rich amount of detail going into these environments. Just look at how one of the buttons appears to be popping off the bush here. Now this other screenshot is interesting. In it, we can see some trees made of fabric behind Yoshi. But if you look a bit deeper outside the window, you'll see some more trees that appear to be the real thing. This picture suggests that maybe the entire adventure, or at least parts of it, actually takes place in the real world. What if Yoshi's just living out the fantasies of a daydreaming child? And with that, we're done covering everything we could dig up on the new Yoshi Wii U game. As usual, let us know if we missed anything by posting in the comments. Thanks for watching, and make sure to stay tuned to GameXplain.com for more on Yoshi Wii U and other things gaming too.